Next letter, Philadelphia. Verses 7 through 13. And to the angel of the church of Philadelphia write, the Holy One, the true One, the one having the key of David, the one opening and no one will shut, the one closing and no one opens, says this, I know your works. Behold, I have given before you an open door which no one is able to shut. Because you have little power, and kept my word and did not deny my name. Behold, I will give from the synagogue of the enemy, the ones calling themselves Jews and are not, but are lying. Behold, I will make them in order that they will come and bow down before your feet and know that I loved you. Because you have kept the word of my endurance, I also will keep you from the hour of testing about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell in the land, or the world, or the earth, land or earth. We'll get to that in a second. I am coming quickly, hold fast what you have, in order that no one should take your wreath. The one overcoming, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will certainly not go out from it again. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. All right, so we were up here in Sardis, next to Lake Sardis. We're going to move just a little bit down the road to Philadelphia, right here as we move along. Primarily agricultural economy with these guys, particularly in grape growing and production of wine. Suffered an earthquake, same earthquake as Sardis did, because it's not very far away, in AD 17, also rebuilt. If you remember, I talked about the Attalids. Do you remember me bringing up the Attalids? Okay, so you had Alexander the Great. Okay, he died and his generals took over. Okay, so Lysimachus ends up with this territory eventually, and then they get moved out of the way, and this other group, the Attalids, come in and take over briefly before the Romans come and take control. Okay, so the Attalids are there, and their king at some point was Eumenes II. Okay, Eumenes was king there, and his brother Attalus II loved his brother so much so that when a false report of Eumenes' death came to Attalus, Attalus took the crown. Then when he found out his brother was still alive, he gave the crown back to his brother. That's how much he loved him. And so he founded the city of Philadelphia, because philia and adelphos is love of brother. Okay? So that's where the name of the city comes from. Okay? But that's how much he loved him, and he founded this city for him. Eventually, when the Pergamenes took control, kind of in the midst of all that stuff, the intention of the city was basically as a Greco-missionary city. In other words, it was a kind of a staging ground for the spread of Greek culture to the east. I'm sorry, I keep doing this wrong direction for you. To the east. Okay, so it's kind of a staging ground for Greek movement to the east, Greek culture and ideas. And so, very heavily Greek-influenced environment here. Had many temples and religious festivals every year. It was so much so that it was called, kind of nicknamed, Little Athens. Okay, and since wine production was such a big deal there, their main chief god there was Dionysius. Everybody remember who Dionysius is? He's the party god. Get drunk. You ever heard of a Bacchant festival? Or what do they call it? Bacchanal, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this is the same god. Okay, I shouldn't say it's the same god. Same association. Bacchus, I think, is a little bit different than Dionysius. But the idea is they love their wine. They love to party and have festivals. So Jesus is depicted here as the Holy One, the true one, and the one having the key of David to rule his kingdom. Now, the reason why this imagery is so important in this context is because you'll notice he brings up the issue of the synagogue again. Now, there is no explicit persecution mentioned in this passage, but given the context and the way he's talking about it, it's very likely that the people he's talking about have been kicked out of the synagogue. Okay? The Jews have kicked them out. You're not part of us. You're worshiping a false Messiah, to which Jesus says, nope. Jesus is the Holy One, which is a reference to being God. He is the true one, the true Messiah. Okay? And he's the one having the key to the kingdom of David. He's the one who has the right to rule Israel. So he is the Messiah, the Son of God, the true Messiah, the coming King. Okay? this becomes important because, and by the way, the key of David thing is an imagery from Isaiah 22. But the idea is that he's the one, therefore, who's able to open the door to enter into the kingdom. He's the only one that has the keys to the door to open the door to the kingdom for these people. And so when he mentions right after this that he, even though they had little power, they had kept his word, even though they were facing persecution by the Jews, he has opened the door for them to enter into his kingdom. And he's kept it, because he's the only one who's allowed to open it, and he's the only one who's got the power to shut it. And nobody can open it or shut it when he says otherwise. Okay? So they had little power in the community. They had no ability to really prop themselves up at all. They did the best they could, and they kept his word and did not deny Christ in the midst of all of that. And therefore, he's opened the door to the kingdom for them. And so his encouragement to them is that they would, in fact, receive entrance into the kingdom. And further, that the Jews of the synagogue, and not necessarily, depending upon how you understand the context and how you interpret this, the Jews he's talking about here are either the immediate Jews he's talking about there in Philadelphia, or it's just the Jewish people in general being brought before them, that they would essentially prostrate themselves before the Christians as leaders alongside Christ and confess, you were right. He is the Messiah. We were wrong. In fact, we get this sort of imagery from Zechariah, where it says they will look on him whom they have pierced and mourn. Okay, same sort of idea and imagery of this kind of finally clicking, coming before and submitting. We also see this where imagery you get from the Old Testament of the enemies coming and bowing down to be ruled. We'll get into this a little bit later when we discuss the millennial kingdom. But there is a sense in which those entering into the millennial kingdom, not all of them will be believers. Some of them will be pagans who have not turned to Christ, but they will be subjected to his rule whether they want to or not. And that's part of the imagery that's being depicted here, is that there will be a time when even all nations, regardless of what they think about Jesus, will be subjected to him because his rule will be present on the earth during that kingdom period. Okay? Further, they would be kept from the time of testing that was coming on the whole world, or on the land. So the problem in verse 10 you run into is, he says he's going to keep them from the hour of testing that's coming upon the whole world, and then he says further, to test those who dwell in the earth or land, depending upon how you handle this. Okay, so I'm going to give you two alternatives. You can enjoy it per your own study. Okay. If it's earth, the idea is probably a little more global perspective here, and that they're being told when the time of trouble that you're going to see coming in Revelation and the rest of the book comes, he's going to preserve them through it. Okay? Or it could be something that's more local that's about to happen. If it's coming upon the land, then it might A, be local Philadelphia area, or it might be literally Israel, the land, if you will. Okay? So those are two alternatives. Given the context, given some of the imagery, I do think that the idea of a global perspective here is a little more legitimate. It's just kind of strange because it didn't happen in their time. The idea is that you who remain faithful, just like these did, when you come to those times, you'll be preserved through it. Okay? But again, I leave that to your own study. But the big deal is that they would be made pillars in the temple of God. We see this imagery used elsewhere of other people in the scriptures, where the idea is they will become permanent fixtures in the temple of God, in the worship of God, in the community of God. They will permanently be there with the name of God on them, with the name of Jerusalem on them. And remember we talked about the new name being written on the stone for these people that are coming in? Same idea here with this new name Christ has given them. So it says his new name, or my new name, is what Jesus says, but the idea is the name that they give, that he gives to them. Okay? So the issue here is it's a spiritually alive church. This is what's being spiritually alive. Like the assembly had suffered rejection by the Jews, ostracizing by the Gentiles, and yet remained faithful to the Lord. The good news should transform us into a people who trust in the Lord even in the midst of persecution and rejection and hardship. This is what it should look like. I was telling the other class years ago, I don't know what, I must have psychological problems clearly. You get people that say, there's nothing wrong with you. I say, there's a lot wrong with me. I used to have these nightmares about doing something horrible and the police chasing me and taking me to prison. I don't know what it was. I've never done anything to warrant that. I think I may have had two or three traffic tickets in my whole life. but it was just this thing that constantly plagued me in just dreaming, these nightmares. But I got to thinking about the whole idea is that you've done something wrong and you're being thrown into prison for it, separated from your family and your people. It's horrible, okay? But I had just thinking about this, like, you get thrown into prison for being a Christian, suddenly there's something about it that doesn't sting quite so much. It's still horrible. It's still being torn away from your family. Don't get me wrong. But there's something that gives you strength in knowing I'm here because of Christ. I'm here because of my commitment to Christ, that makes it more bearable, that makes it easier to deal with. I'm being poorly treated because I'm a Christian. I'm being treated like this because I have not given up the name of Christ. Now, let me interject. Delusions of persecution is something I see a lot with people who claim to be Christians. Oh, they're being hard. No, you're being foolish is what the problem is. You're trying to die on a hill that's not worth dying on. If it's legit, then so be it. But a lot of times these reports I hear of people getting into all sorts of trouble because they weren't willing to compromise on something. It's like, you're not willing to compromise on something that's ridiculous. Who cares? It's just simple things like that. So just be careful that you're not getting into this delusions of persecution kind of thing, because make sure you're being persecuted for the right reasons. But ultimately, I think it really does, if you are being persecuted and suffered for the name of Christ legitimately, there's something about that gives you a boldness in your suffering and a joy. All right, so any questions with Philadelphia? All right.